So our last session this afternoon is looking at, as one of the panelists said, that economic development is one of the key aspects of a healthy city. Going after old industry is the old way. Creating new industry, being a catalyst for new job creation is the new way. And we have cities that are experiencing success in creating a culture that catalyzes and creates. Are we okay, Mark? All right. In creating a culture that supports the introduction of new industry and new jobs. Our panel this afternoon is hands-on experienced with this. First, the co-director of the Mayor's Office on New Urban Mechanics in the city of Philadelphia, Jeff Friedman. Next, from Union Square Ventures, the managing partner, Fred Wilson. Followed by Molly Thorkelson, the firm's CEO, and the firm is ADA Fruit Industries. And finally, from Kansas City, Missouri, the famous mayor and graduate of the Mayor's Institute on City Design, which gave you at least half the talent you have, Mayor Sly James. Welcome all. We look forward to your discussions. Good to see you, sir. How are you?
I guess it's evening almost. Good afternoon to everybody. Hopefully you'll be here when we finish. I've counted each and every one of you. I will be watching the doors to make sure you don't slip out. I'm honored to be here with this great panel. We have a very interesting discussion, I believe, for you. We have for years now been grappling with issues of economic development and what that means in a changing economy. And many of us have figured out that chasing smokestacks across lines of one sort or another is no longer what economic development is truly all about. What we're looking for now is to find out how can cities accelerate the economic development and their downtown areas in particular, their business areas, through entrepreneurship and encouraging startup businesses. So why don't we start right away with Molly and ask you, Molly, because you have a business that's located in the downtown area. Were you a pioneer or were you simply one of the first of many?
Well, my company, Ada Fruit Industries, is primarily a manufacturing company, and I believe we're probably one of a kind in Lower Manhattan. We manufacture electronic components on Varick Street. We actually walked here today.
You want to tell them what you're wearing there too? I mean, it's kind of hard to miss.
This is one of the items that we manufacture. It's called a Flora. It's actually a very small computer, and these are LEDs that are lighting up according to how it's programmed. There's a microchip on our Flora. But I think that manufacturing we decided as a company that manufacturing in Manhattan was very important for us because of the vitality of the culture. Particularly in our building, we have an advertising company. We have architects, we have artists, we have designers, and we have a very vital workforce in our company that can commute by subway from any borough to our space.
Have you been able to track or determine whether or not your move into that space, doing what you've done, has had an impact or been an incentive for others of like kind to move nearer?
There were a few companies that started around the same time as us, and I couldn't categorize them exactly as the same as ours. There's MakerBot over in Brooklyn,
right.
And they do 3D printing, and there's actually been a huge explosion in 3D printing companies, particularly in New York City. But I do think, and I don't know how many of you are aware of this, there's been this growth of Silicon Alley in New York, and the growth of Ada Fruit has really paralleled a lot of that. And I do think that we've inspired a lot of tech startups around it, but I don't think we haven't really seen a big growth of manufacturing in Soho. The tech startups, yes.
All right. Jeff, why don't we ask you about two things. First, why don't you tell us about the Bloomberg grant?
Okay.
And what you got there?
Sure. It's called, we were fortunate to be one of the, I guess, 305 cities competing in the Mayor's Challenge. We ended up in the top 5, and we received $1 million. Well, we're going to get $1 million for our project idea. It's called the Philadelphia Social Enterprise Partnership. We like acronyms in government, and in Philadelphia, we have to brand it with our city name. But basically, the concept is to look at civic challenges as opportunities for entrepreneurs to solve. So we're working with a Good Company Group. They're a social enterprise business accelerator in town, and the Wharton School, half-decent business school in West Philadelphia. And we're working together to really bring kind of government policy experts and other public policy experts in at the ground floor, so that there's kind of less build it and they'll come social enterprise, but that the enterprises are sort of formed around the problems that we present to them. And while we're doing this, we're figuring out how do we hardwire it into our procurement process so it becomes one of the ways that city government sources solutions to its problems.
One of the other things too is, and you're in kind of the same business I am. You work for the city of Philadelphia, so I work for the city of Kansas City, and I imagine that in your thought processes and some of your duties entail trying to figure out what is the best recipe in a city to attract those startups. Some cities are better at it than others. Would you agree?
I think that's got to be true.
All right.
Yeah.
So then what do you think are the main ingredients that go into that soup that will cause entrepreneurs to come to your city and eat it?
Well, I think some of the basics are, the city does have to look at its taxes and its regulatory structure so that it's welcoming and inviting to entrepreneurs and startup businesses. We've looked at that as a city, so we have a program called Jumpstart Philadelphia, and it exempts startups of a certain size from a lot of the licensing requirements. I'm sorry, the fees, not the licensing requirement. You can't just come in and not have licenses, as well as business taxes for the first 2 years of operations. We've also changed our taxation laws so that it's more hospitable for venture capital firms to locate in the city. So that stuff's important. But we think what's really important is sort of creating a movement that people can attach themselves to. So creating the network and really listening to the folks who are in the accelerators, in the co-working spaces, in the incubators, and talking to them and figuring out sort of what are their pain points, how can we as a city government remove them, and how can we just be a facilitator to help them sort of connect with the folks that they want to connect with in the city.
Fantastic. Fred, now, he mentioned venture capital and making the city attractive to venture capitalists. Is it that important to have venture capital in a local area where startups are, or are there other avenues?
Well, I think the most important thing is, the most important thing is you got to have the entrepreneurs. But the entrepreneurs want to be in a place where there's other support systems, and one of those is financing. I think the most important source of financing that cities should focus on is not necessarily the venture capital firms, but the angels, because you can't. Usually, a venture capital firm is not going to provide the first funding to an entrepreneur. Usually, that's going to come from friends and family or wealthy individuals who like to make what we call angel investments. And so if you look at the success of New York over the past almost 20 years now as a startup community, I would point to the development of a very large angel network as maybe the single most important thing, other than having more local entrepreneurs. And the two go hand in hand. So that is getting, and part of it that can be done by just getting the business people in a city to start thinking about taking some of their wealth and reinvesting it in new business formation in the community. And some cities and some cultures and some regions have more of that kind of investor mentality than others. It's very prevalent in Silicon Valley. Right? I mean, that's part of what makes Silicon Valley what it is that there's this whole culture of, I made a bunch of money and now I'm going to take some of that and reinvest it in the next generation of entrepreneurs that are rising up. And it's very, very built into their culture. Starting to see that in New York. You've seen that in Boston for years. You're starting to see that in other places. But they're, you know, in a community like Philadelphia, you're starting to see that as well. I think what Josh Koppelman has done there, I think, is really important. And it only really takes one or two sort of galvanizing leaders to make that happen. Josh is doing it in Philadelphia. My friend Brad Feld did it in Boulder. So you need to get somebody who can kind of rally the business interest to say, hey, let's support this activity. And that's very, very important.
Well, Molly, you're in a business that you've grown over a period of time. What were those things that you found most important as you were in the early phases and growing?
Well, I'm actually not the founder of the company, so Lamar Freed founded the company almost 7 years ago. But actually, we never received any venture capital financing, so the company was grown from scratch with a loan from the family, with almost no money from an apartment.
Other things in the city, perhaps regulatory issues, those types of things, did they matter to you?
Initially, what was important was that the company was initially started in Brooklyn and very quickly moved to Lower Manhattan to the Wall Street area. And what was the most important actually was that we were near a UPS shipping center and near the post office.
Transportation, shipping.
Yes, because in addition to manufacturing items like these, we sell approximately 1,400 products out of an online-only website. And ship all over the world. So what was important to growing our company, and we don't have very many competitors, I should add, and our company is pretty unique in the United States. So a lot of people will turn to our company to buy these products from Brazil, from Africa, from Asia. So what was important was that we could get out these packages very quickly.
Right, right.
And then simultaneously, Lamar was developing a lot of these products herself and designing them, engineering them. So really, speed was important to our company initially, and it was what allowed our company to survive and grow so quickly. So over the course of almost 7 years, we went from about $10,000 to $15 million.
Wow, that's extraordinary.
With no funding.
That's pretty neat.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen in all places where you have that kind of initial startup and capitalization. Going back to the issue of how do we make our cities more attractive to entrepreneurs and startups, what role, I think Barry Feld would call them feeders, what role do feeders such as universities, other businesses, government even, play in making a city or a regional area a vital, vibrant area for entrepreneurs and startups?
I think they're all important components of the ecosystem. I think in terms of government, one of the primary roles government can play is helping direct entrepreneurial energy and then consequently funding towards issues that matter. If you kind of think of maybe civic problems as emerging markets, there's really an opportunity to look at these civic challenges as places where you can direct these resources, and that's sort of the role that government can play, but also just the strong convening role that government can play in terms of bringing all those partners to the table. Bringing the university partners, the incubators, the accelerators, the VCs, the angel investors, creating a movement around this kind of activity.
It also seems that one of the things about those types of partnerships is, don't we have to be pretty careful that everybody kind of stays in their own lane? To some extent, government moves at a pace that is not compatible with entrepreneurial endeavors. So how do we keep government in its proper space so that it is a support to startups and entrepreneurs, but not a hindrance?
Well, I think you can't try to do too much. The government, I don't think, should try to create the new businesses and maybe not even fund the new businesses. I think what government needs to do is focus on what its role is, and think about, okay, in the context of what my role is, what are the things that I can do to make a difference? And one area that I would point to, which you and I talked about before we got on stage, is revitalization of the downtown area, which obviously you did in Kansas City. And that goes hand in hand with creating an environment that people who would want to work in startups, would want to have. So cities that have kind of revitalized their downtown areas, that have, the kind of environment where younger people might want to live, they can attract the kind of workforce that entrepreneurial companies are going to need. The truth is that a lot of high-growth startups have a lot of younger employees, partially because they're less expensive, coming right out of college, partially because they're willing to work longer hours. They don't have family responsibilities at home. So there's a whole bunch of reasons why, the mid-late 20s kind of workforce is very, very important to startup companies. And so you want to have a quality of life that would appeal to those people. And it's one of the challenges that I think some cities have, is that they can't keep their younger people. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really important to do whatever you have to do to try to keep your younger people in your city, create a place where they want to live, and a place where they want to go out after work, and other kinds of things. Here in New York, one of the things that's made a big difference seems kind of silly, but the bike lanes, being able to bike to work, this is something that improves people's quality of life, at least at that kind of person's quality of life. And so it's little things like that you don't think make that big of a difference, that actually I think are very, very impactful.
I was in New York about a week and a half ago, and the issue of bike lanes came up in a slightly different context. It seemed like it was a political issue in the upcoming elections. Is that true or no?
There's some people who are very kind of upset about the fact that the streets are getting, the number of lanes are getting shrunk for bike lanes, and now we've got the city bike system that's taking over swaths of the sidewalk and streets and that kind of thing. So there's certainly a group of people who are sort of car focused who are opposed to it, but there's a lot of people who really, I think, are benefiting from this. It fits their lifestyle better. And so I'm not sure that, it's not clear to me what the winning side of that issue is.
Molly, you're the COO of your company.
Yes.
Does that include operations with regards to HR?
Yes.
So do you have much of an opportunity to talk to your folks who are employed by the company and find out what factors they're honing in on as to where they want to live and where they want to work?
Absolutely.
So what are you finding?
Well, and I can speak actually from a personal experience as someone who moved to New York as an 18-year-old.
2 years ago?
10 years ago.
Oh, okay. I was close.
And actually moved from a state that's famous for its brain drain of young people, and doesn't really have a city that's attractive to anyone who's young, okay. And came here because it's attractive to be a young person here. But from a demographic perspective, of course, I live in Brooklyn, which is where many people in their 20s live. But New York is an experience for people who are young. Basically, Manhattan, young people are priced out of Manhattan at this point, so everyone has been spread out to boroughs, which means for a company like Adafruit, it's very appealing to be centralized, because even 5 or 8 years ago, everyone could afford to live in Brooklyn. That's not really the case anymore. A number of our employees actually live in Queens now, which maybe wouldn't have happened 10 years ago. But as the real estate prices have gone up, people have been spread out more to the north, more to the northeast, some into New Jersey. So for startups, it's important actually to be centrally located so we can get people from every direction coming in easily on public transportation.
And in a place where people can afford.
Yes, and we have a number of people riding their bikes in, actually. And one of Bloomberg's incentives was asking that parking garages provide bicycle parking locally, and we found that actually most of them are advertising it, but secretly shoo you away if you go to park your bicycle. So that's an issue we're having. with our employees.
This sounds like a
funny thing about
convenient time for a commercial for Kansas City. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to finish thought there. The mayor and the EDC folks convened a group of landlords, big commercial landlords in New York City, and a bunch of entrepreneurs. And I got invited to that meeting. This happened maybe 9 months ago. And the question was, what could the landlords do to make their buildings more friendly to startups? And one of the issues that came up was being able to take their bikes up the elevators, right? Because they don't typically allow that, right? They might allow it in the freight elevators. And the landlords were shocked that this was an issue. And yet CEO after CEO after CEO was saying, I got a dozen employees or 24 employees who are riding to work and they're bitching to me every single day. They can't get they got to park their bike outside and risk getting it stolen or whatever. And these landlords were like, well, we can solve that problem. That's no big deal. They had no idea that this was even an issue.
Wow. Just sometimes it helps just to listen to your customers, doesn't it? Now, Jeff, you're in New Urban Mechanics in Philadelphia. If you could just say for a couple of seconds for folks so that they know what that is and why, and it might give some insight as to why you're sitting on this particular panel.
Absolutely. So we say that we're the civic idea incubator for the city of Philadelphia. There's two of us. I have a co-director, and we're modeled after Boston's mayor's office in New Urban Mechanics. Usually I check to see if there's Boston folks in the room. If not, I take credit for the idea. But we're one of a number of kind of embedded civic innovator groups in cities around the country. Of course, Kansas City has one in Ashley, Hand, and San Francisco has a civic innovation office, and as well as a number of other cities. But we see ourselves as a portal for innovators in and outside of government. So we're trying to connect folks, typically folks on the inside with challenges that they're looking to solve, with folks on the outside who might be able to help solve those challenges. And then we also talk about ourselves as a risk aggregation platform or kind of an innovation sanctuary, but just the idea that there are people and projects that need, they may be experimental, they may be unproven, but we want to help people experiment and try new things, trying to bring the lean startup ethos into the civic space.
Thank you. Why don't we go ahead and open it up for questions? If you have questions, find one of the microphones and come on up. And while we're waiting for you, we're going to continue our discussion, but please don't hesitate if you have something you want to ask about to do so. One of the things, too, that I think is always worth saying, particularly as it relates to government, perhaps the biggest innovation in any governmental system is to change the culture that has been there for years, and frankly, a culture that a lot of people inside government believe was there before you got there, Jeff, and I got there, and will be there when we're gone. So is that part of your responsibility as well, is to work on that cultural aspect?
We think it is, yeah. I guess I would say I think the prerequisite I feel for our work in Philadelphia has been just kind of the focus on opening up government, making it more transparent and ethical, and that's work that actually Mayor Nutter did when he was a council person, and we're one of the cities that now has an open data executive order that requires us to do certain things by certain times. We have a chief data officer, but I think those are actually important prerequisites. But we do think that we're trying to change the culture around problem solving. I think what we're trying to do is make it okay to probably disaggregate. A lot of times in big local governments, we tend to aggregate our problems, and then it's very difficult to solve something that's sort of massive and hulking. And we're saying that it's okay to maybe break off a chunk, try it somewhere, see if it works. If you fail, learn from it, fail quickly and learn from it. And if it works, let's, scale it up and maybe propagate it to another city.
Fred, capital shortages for entrepreneurs. How do they overcome that over a period of time, and how deadly or mortal can it be to a company in the startup phase or post-startup phase to run into those problems? What are the outlets for solving?
Well, look, you can always bootstrap as their company did, and I think sometimes entrepreneurs think that they can't get where they need to go without a big investment, and sometimes that's not the case. But in any case, being able to secure investment capital so that you can hire and grow is oftentimes critical. And if there isn't the capital locally, then you're going to have to get on a plane and go somewhere else. And the good news is, as I was telling you, I'm seeing more and more investors, technology investors anyway, which is the world I'm in, have typically been located either on the West Coast in Silicon Valley and on the East Coast in largely New York and Boston. And so those sectors have been well served, and the rest of the country has been underserved. But what I was telling Sly beforehand is that there's a company in Kansas City that we're investors in, and they just secured an investment from a Silicon Valley venture capital firm as well. So now you see firms from the East Coast and the West Coast putting money in a company right in the middle of the country. Investors willing to get on planes and go to where the interesting companies are. So I think the answer is, if you can't find the money locally, then you're going to have to go somewhere else and find it.
Molly, going back to your experiences at Ada, and to particularly what your employees and workers are looking for, beyond getting them here and having them here, do you have trouble finding them in the first place? Is there criteria that you're looking for? They're just coming out of the woodwork at you?
It's very, very easy for us. We have a 10 or 20 person wait list to work for a company right now. And
how many employees do you have?
We're close to 50 right now.
Okay.
We've never advertised. It's always been word of mouth. But I should add that most of the work at our company is the shipping and kitting department. Mm-hmm. And I think what's great about our company is, so we have 2 or 3 engineers. We have an executive staff of about 10, and then 40 people who are putting these kits that we sell together. It's actually not very interesting work. It's factory work essentially.
Right.
And then we have a shipping department, which is again factory work.
Right.
But everyone who works there has something to do on the side. We have electronic musicians. We have someone who does generative art. And a lot of people contribute to our blog or to our products.
Right.
And I don't think that would be possible anywhere else. And that's why New York is so important to our company.
Outstanding. I think one thing that we've done with all of our buildup of tech and high tech is that somehow we've gotten to the point where we've segregated out that is good work and that factory work that a lot of our parents did to fed us when we were growing up is not being quite so good.
Right.
You couldn't work without it. Your company would not succeed without those folks.
And the reason I said earlier I don't really think there's another company that's quite like ours is because though there are some companies that design products that are manufactured, mostly it's farmed out to China. Or if it is manufactured here, they have a corporate office in Manhattan and then their factory is out in a warehouse elsewhere. So I do think it's unique that we have one warehouse space on one floor in Manhattan, and the person who's doing the design for what we're manufacturing is literally sitting 20 feet away from the machine that's making it.
Yeah, that makes a big difference, I think. Yes, sir.
Hello, I'm John Marshoni. I'm the mayor of Redmond, Washington. And earlier,
I love mayors, John.
I love him too, Mayor
Yeah.
Sly.
Yeah.
Smart and good looking.
Yes, indeed. Saviors of the world.
Yes. Earlier today, we talked about universities and innovation. And Boston, New York, and Silicon Valley are 3 areas known for top flight universities. How has having a university near you helped you with innovation or entrepreneurialism in general?
Do you want to take that, Jeff?
I mean, I can really just speak from kind of professional experience. I mean, my office has great partnerships with the 3 major universities that are approximate to downtown. So Temple University, where I'm an alma mater, I'm a double L. Went there for law school and undergrad, and then Drexel and Penn. And it's through the partnerships where we're focused on entrepreneurial problem solving, whether it's at the Temple has an apps and maps studio where we're looking at solving civic challenges, but really getting urban youth involved in the creation of the solutions. So sort of with a focus on diversifying the folks who are making tech, or Drexel's Excite Center, who gives us a co-op, and we're working on a number of collaborative projects with them. And then I mentioned the Philadelphia Social Enterprise Partnership, which is with Wharton over at Penn. So I think, I mean, in terms of, augmenting the potency of what my office is able to do. It's it would be impossible to move forward without those kinds of partnerships.
And I think I can tell you too that in Kansas City with the Block School, very highly rated school for business administration and entrepreneurship, they're intimately involved in the entrepreneurial space. They are one of the partners in the Digital Sandbox, which is our proof of concepts lab that's attached to Launch KC, which is the entry point for entrepreneurs of certain types of startup. The goal of Launch KC is to create and foster and support 10 businesses that reach $3 million of sales over a 3-year period. So, and they've already got some there and they're going through, and then they feed into the Digital Sandbox and the Proof of Concepts Lab, and then to a finer point to hone what they learn there. None of that would be possible without the involvement of the Block School and the university. Frankly, I think that you could talk to a lot of people who will tell you that truly great cities are close to truly great research institutions or universities. I think some of that is being eroded a little bit by specialization of certain types of schools in any university. Where'd you go to school?
Columbia.
Oh, nice school.
Yeah.
Yeah. Smart woman. I love it. Fred, anything to add on that issue?
I think universities are critical, and not just for the research that comes out of them. That's what people think about a lot. But I just also think the talented young workforce that universities can create for your company, and even founding. You know, we see more and more people coming out of school wanting to start a business right from scratch. Now, there's obviously a lot of challenges doing that because they don't have any work experience, and so some of these people end up struggling. But in any case, I just think that the vitality of the workforce and the energy of the people coming out of these universities is just great for cities in general.
Go ahead.
I would just add one more thing to my thought. I mean, 'cause I think this might be important for government practitioners. These relationships didn't come about accidentally. We talked to people and tried to engage with them. And a lot of times, I guess I think of it as, it's the business development work that maybe a government worker would do. I mean, I'm not trying to actually put a deal together, but it's initiative development. I'm trying to make contact with folks who at some point I might be able to partner with. And that's how these partnerships came about. So I think, it's great to have the mayor and the university president connect, and that's a connection that needs to happen. But there's 26,000 people in my government. If we're going to have university partnerships, it's going to happen at the department and the agency level.
Right. Yes, you have a question, sir.
I do. I'm Bruce Miller with Populous, another Kansas City business.
Good to see you.
Good to see you, Mayor. I'm wondering if the panel...
Could you do me a favor?
Sure.
Would you be so kind as to tell the folks what Populous does?
We're an architecture firm, and we bring people together. We're a firm specializing in public assembly facilities, sports, convention centers, anything drawing large groups of folks. So my question is about Kansas City, Mayor, to continue your commercial for our city. What can we expect to see with the installation now of Google Fiber in our community? Low cost, high speed internet access for all.
I think that when Kansas City, Kansas and Kansas City, Missouri jointly got Google Fiber, we set up a bi-state innovation team. I called Mayor Reardon, my counterpart in Kansas City, Kansas, and said, we both got it. Why don't we use this as an opportunity to actually engage in regionalism? Because we talk a lot about regionalism, but regionalism without a project to work on is really just kind of a platitude. We all want to say we're regional, but what are you doing? Well, not much. So we had a regional moment. And out of that came a playbook of things that we could do. The first thing that we learned about Google Fiber is it's a tool. It's a great tool, but who's going to wield it? What's the city going to be like? How do we pull together? So I think that out of all of that, we've seen some very good initial things. It was the impetus for Launch for the Launchpad and Launch KC. Probably one of the more impressive things is the Startup Village that occurred on State Line. And Startup Village really started with an individual who happened to own a house that I think had been left to him as a part of a will when someone died, and he had no real use for it, and then decided to rehab the house and simply invite startups and entrepreneurs to come live in the house rent-free for 90 days minimum. I think 120 is probably the max, and take advantage of Google Fiber to work on whatever they were working on. So I'm down at the Kauffman Foundation one night having a reception for Code for America and Income for Kids. And I struck up a conversation with them, and I say kids because they're 19 years old. They told me they had just gotten into town, having driven from Boston to go to the Startup Village, where they are working on software that will make 3D printing more accessible on the home user basis, an outfit called Handprint. 4 19-year-olds, 3 guys and a young lady. That's one thing that's happening is that it is a magnet that is attracting people from places other than Kansas City into the area with neat ideas. When we had City Age in Kansas City in December, I think Mark and Merrill will probably remember this, the very first person who asked the very first question was a woman who had moved to Kansas City from Denver because of Google Fiber, so that she could work on her company called Cyber Gems, which is a music deal around the world. I don't really understand it. And then there's the young kid whose parents drove him from Texas because they had no idea of where Kansas City was, weren't very happy with the idea of their young high school graduate coming to Kansas City to spend his summer rather than getting ready to go to Harvard or Duke or wherever he was going. But they came, they brought him here, and he was living in the Startup Village. So we're seeing an influx of bright young minds. Number 2 thing that we're seeing is we're seeing a real attack on the digital divide. Because you may remember that when Google started, they had this really ingenious marketing ploy that, you know, it was genius. They basically said, we're in, and here's how we're going to decide who gets fiber. We've divided the city up into small segments called fiber hoods. And whichever fiber, and we set a goal for each fiber hood to reach. And once you reach that goal, you're guaranteed that we will put fiber in your fiber hood. So if your goal was 50% of the residents, then you had to get 50% of the people. Oh, and by the way, all you have to do is like put down a $10 deposit and we know you're serious. So they got the people who wanted the product to go out and champion the product itself, put down money for it, convince other people in their neighborhood to do the same so that they could be the first. But what we saw is that on one side, the wealthier part of town, west side, went green in an instant. On the other side, the east side, stayed red. The people on the green side then started reaching out onto the red side and changing that. So now it was like 91% of the fiber hoods went green. And it went green because of the city grassroots activists who did it. So the one thing that I think that you'll see because of it is that you'll see a more cohesive community, because we now understand something that we didn't understand fully before. The other is I think you'll see a continued influx of new, smart minds doing things to take advantage of Google Fiber. Third, the thing that I think that we're going to see is some advances, hopefully, in the educational arena by using that to bring resources into classrooms that could not ordinarily afford to have those resources. And that's critical in Kansas City, as you know. By the way, I want to make sure that you were very modest, but you probably built most of the significant stadiums around the world, including London, did you not, for the Olympics? Certainly the ones in Kansas City. I think you may have had something to do with a few here in New York. Very big architectural firm in whom we are proud, and they are an outstanding corporate citizen in Kansas City. Any other? Oh, there's one. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Andrea Moore. I'm with the New York City Economic Development Corporation, and we report a lot on, or asked a lot on VC data and statistics, and we noticed that there's a lot of Series A and seed funding in New York City, but there's, a lot of startups being orphaned at the later stages, and so I was just wondering, should New York City in general, or in New York City specifically, and cities in general, worry about this sort of orphaning of startups when the funding dries up and they don't get acquired, or do you think that it all goes to enhance the startup culture, because now they're in your city's ecosystem and hopefully joining another startup, creating another company, that sort of thing?
Well, I've got a very sort of capitalist Darwinian view of this. If a company has gotten seed funding and Series A funding and they can't get the next round of funding, that means that they messed up. It has nothing to do with the capital markets. I think that if a company can't get their first investor, that's a problem with the investment community. If they can't get their first, big slug of money, that might be a problem with the investment community. But they've gotten those two things and they can't get another round, then they screwed up. It's not the capital markets that are at fault.
Did that answer your question? Where are you? Oh, there you are. All right. I think that we have time for one more. Anybody else have a question? No? Well, let me do this then. Let me, first of all, thank you for being here to offer that perspective of a person who actually has a real job.
Exactly.
And actually produces something tangible that gets shipped out to people and they actually use. Fred, your insight on venture capital and those areas is invaluable. Jeff, I have a great deal of admiration for what you're doing in Philadelphia. You guys are leading the pack in a number of ways. So thank you for being here as well. And on behalf of our folks in Kansas City, it's always a pleasure to be here and talking to you about things that deal with entrepreneurship. We're the home of the Kauffman Foundation, which is probably one of the, if not the, premier entrepreneurial research and business and educational research organs in the world. So thank you all for being here. I am sure that you are ready for a drink. I sure as heck am.